My name is Silas Tikaan Galbreath. I go by my middle name Tikaan, is Athabaskan for wolf, an intentional choice by my parents given to all of us a name to keep us connected to our roots. My mother is Donna Galbreath, my father is Jeff Mann, my grandmother on my mother's side is Molly Galbreath, my grandfather is Don Galbreath. I am Otna, Scottish, German, and English, and I strongly identify with being a tribal member of the Mentasta Traditional Council. When I was young, I grew up watching my grandma cut fish. How to handle the fish, how to find the spine, and how to fillet it in a way that minimized waste. Traditional foods were essential. Picking berries on the hillside with my grandma, that's like an early childhood memory. That's like the first thing I think of, like, what do I think of outside? Oh, it's picking berries, and the smell of the tundra and the feeling of the berries on my fingers and like the slowness of the afternoons, but the richness of the moments in those days. And it's in those acts, the act of doing is when the richest stories come out from our elders and those that know, right? It's learning how it was done in the past and how to best honor, the animals or the plants to ensure that nothing spoils, to make sure that the food is still there. And so then culture is being practiced, and my identity is strengthened, and so then my intellectual health is bolstered by the action. And then I actually eat the food. Nutritionists and Western science is catching up to what we've known, which is that the food is better. And it's just, because it's more nutrient dense, and it's richer and it's fresher. And I think choosing our traditional foods, the things that have sustained us for 10,000 years, is one of the most meaningful things that we can all do to help preserve our culture and to evolve our culture. What does that look like today, and how can it continue to be successful into the future? Prior to colonization in Alaska, food sovereignty was practiced by being mobile. We had our fish camp, we had summer camp, we had winter camp, and we moved where the resources were available. So it wasn't, a passive or inactive relationship with the land. It was very intentional and focused on the relationship of reciprocity, that deep connection, ensuring the vibrancy and health of our relatives, of our plant relatives, of our animal relatives. Their health meant our health. Their health meant our survival. And our survival meant their abundance. It was this deeply interwoven and connected relationship. Our elders could tell the difference between the salmon, where they were going to spawn, where they would finish their life and bring new life back into the earth. And in years where one stream in the headwaters area was lacking the return, they would intentionally move the fertilized eggs from one stream to another to ensure that there would be a continuation of the population of salmon returning into our streams. And so we are a part of the landscape in our Indigenous worldviews, and by being participatory and in relationship, that is what helps to create the abundance and the diversity. Original land stewards. That is an identity that we all share as Indigenous people. When you take more of a Western approach to game management, it's frequently around, the harvest, the take, the number of animals available to be taken by hunters and fishermen or commercial fleets. And it's not through the lens of like, how do we cultivate the greatest abundance of, this species or this plant? It's like, oh, we need to manage it in a way like we don't take too much. It's kind of like, and I think it's like almost a flip of that coin, to manage land from the traditional ecological knowledge that I've been exposed to. So it's a different framework to make decisions from. And so as we look to long-term solutions, the next 10,000 years of food security in Alaska, I think it's vitally important to acknowledge and respect the traditional ecological knowledge that exists within each of our communities and within each of the regions of Alaska. With statehood and then the resulting Lands Claim Act, that locked us all into what we said was ours. Even that idea of ownership, it's a new concept because, we never owned the land. It was being in service to the land, being in relationship and ensuring that abundance again so that we could survive, and we were a part of it, not owners of it. And so this idea of ownership, in one regard, locked us into a non-mobile approach to life. We were all kind of locked into the sites where, the villages were chosen to be put into. And so there was a need for supplemental foods, commodity food boxes coming into the community to make that a viable and tenable way to live in one place rather than being more nomadic in the movement with the landscape. And in a lot of our communities, there isn't a lot of economic stimulus. Like there isn't money coming in. There aren't jobs that pay the American dollar, right? And so it wouldn't be possible to live in these communities without the availability of our traditional food sources. It offsets the cost of living to be able to go off and harvest from the land, to be able to bring in a caribou, 2 caribou, 3, to provide that for the community. Because people couldn't be fed because the cost of living, of buying the food from the store is beyond the income of the majority of people that are living there. And so there is a continued exploration of like, how do we increase that abundance and availability of the food, and to diversify, to integrate more of the Western crops that are now part of our awareness into our diets in a more sustainable way. Because buying rotten lettuce from the community store is just not appealing. Nobody wants that iceberg lettuce that's half brown and slimy. Just no one wants to eat it, right? So exploring ways that the land can provide in new ways is part of that evolution of culture and the continuation of our communities continuing to thrive in place rather than being more mobile. Community gardens do an incredible thing. When you're able to grow something locally, it's just that much more abundant in nutrients and freshness and yumminess and more desirable to eat. Alaska, as a cold climate environment, faces all sorts of challenges with traditionally Western approaches even, and so some of the solutions have been container gardening, so raising up off the soil, so the soil's warmer, so you have the ability to grow more diversity of crop, using hoop houses to increase the ambient air temperature and extend the growing season, and even use of hydroponic and other more kind of high-tech, even high-tech, low-tech solutions that allow for cultivation year-round. The fact that many of our communities are off the road system means that the food that is flown in is either poor quality, if it was once fresh, maybe it looked good, by the time it gets there it probably doesn't. And even if it does look good, it usually spoils in a day or two of bringing it home. And so I meet and have conversations with people who are like, I didn't taste a non-canned mushroom until I was a teenager, you know, and like, a green bean, those are disgusting, and then you share one from the garden and it's like, this is delicious, you know. And so I think the cultivation of both Western and traditional crops and the availability of that in communities is really important to inspire the next generation and this generation to like value food. Like, food is so important, and like when it's a high quality, it means a high quality life. High quality food translates to high quality lives. And so to grow it ensures that that intention, that care, that freshness is a part of, you know, putting it on your plate and you taste it, and it makes all the difference. It makes people want to cook from scratch, not from a box. It makes people want to eat their vegetables and not avoid it at all costs. Some of our communities throughout the state, you know, are practicing 80% subsistence, but our subsistence fisheries are the last prioritized in, you know, commercial being the first interest, and then, you know, the obligation to the Pacific Salmon Treaty being second, and then, you know, our subsistence. And so the result is our subsistence fisheries are shut down and our families go without food, and they're forced to then, in some cases, they break the law, because it is that important to have the salmon and the resources in their freezer, because they can't live there without putting up the fish. These large-scale trawlers and the policies around bycatch with those trawlers is appalling. And so it, you know, I think it's rising as a focus point for our communities of like, you know, why or how can the trawling fishing boats have more bycatch of the species that support our livelihoods, our lives, our food security? How can they just toss it away and create that waste and have no consequence, you know, for the volume of harm that they're doing? And it's equal to our ability to stay in our communities. You know, as we continue to grow in population, as we continue to see climate change impacting our everything, there is a need to rethink, you know, basically all of our systems, because it's all different. And that isn't any different than our traditional approaches, at least in my culture. You know, it's, you know, knowledge was attained from surveying the land, from stepping back and really assessing and being in relationship with the things that are around you, and then making decisions about the best path forward for your family and for your community. I think a lot of people think about culture as this static thing, right? Oh, it's, you know, the regalia that my grandma made for me and that I keep in my closet and I hope never degrades. You know, that's my culture. But no, culture is today. It's what I'm wearing right here, right now. I'm an Athabascan male, like this is me. This is my culture. I'm living it, I'm breathing it, I'm talking it. And we shouldn't shy away from that. I think it's colonization getting in our brains, right? Like, my classic statement is I'm too white to be native and too native to be white, like stuck in the middle, but that's my story. So, hey, like, how do I apply my story to food sovereignty? Well, it's again a blend. It's like, what are the Western traditions that make sense? What are the traditional, Athabascan traditional traditions that make sense? And then making those choices and integrating them and intentionally practicing them in my own life. And that's the evolution, right? I'm surveying the land, I'm taking in the world through this lens of, the values that I was given from my parents and my grandparents, and then making intentional choices and sharing them with, my daughter, the next generation. As we think about the future of Alaska's food, the ways in which we engage with the land, consider each action of our own through the lens of 7 generations. It's my great-grandmother, my grandmother, my mother, me, my daughter, my granddaughter, and my great-granddaughter. 7. If we apply that lens, there's the decisions that come out of that framework are very different. In Western culture, it's more common to think about, our individual selves, the lone cowboy, self-determination, self-create, the world is yours to create and cultivate. But when we're thinking about cultivation of the well-being of our community and the well-being of future generations, like, we're gonna make different decisions. And so I think that is an important thing that every one of us can choose to do. How do my actions impact the future, and how might it hurt? And so when I think about it through the lens of food, the best thing that we can do is, in my opinion, is just choose our traditional foods. Honor the culture and the traditions that we come from.